Welcome to episode 7 of my new podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? With my guests, we are discussing health issues, questions you may have, and debunking some of the myths around our health. So in this episode, it's a great pleasure to be discussing things with Professor Mats Brännström, and the title is Transplanting Wombs. So Mats is an internationally renowned specialist in reproductive medicine and fertility. He has extensive expertise in women's health, particularly infertility and IVF treatments, as well as medical research. His passion for improving women's health outcomes has led him to become one of the leading experts in this field. Through his research, teaching, and activism, he hopes to improve care for women around the world. So, hi, Mats.
Hi.
So I would love to start.
Nice to be here.
I would love to start by hearing a bit about your career.
Well, yes, thank you, Joyce, and it's nice to be here with you and to meet you again. So I'm an MD, PhD, an MD, so I have a medical degree first, and after medical school, which in Sweden is 5 years, I did a PhD in reproductive physiology. That meant that I was working on in animal models on the physiology of the ovary. So then I started to learn research, and after that I went back to do an internship, and I combined this with doing a postdoc in Australia, also in research, and then I went back once again to the clinical and did my residency in obstetrics gynecology. So I'm a specialist in obstetrics gynecology, and in the early phase of my career, or my clinical career, because I was late in my clinical career because I'd done so much research before, I actually trained in gyne-oncology surgery, so that's cancer surgery for women. And I did my first training in that in Australia in 1998, and that's when the idea of womb transplantation or uterus transplantation came up to me. And I think Joyce will ask me later about what happened. And then during the last 25 years, I've been a professor in obstetrics and gynecology here at Sahlgrenska Academy, University of Gothenburg, doing the usual course that is combining research with teaching and with clinical activities. And my clinical activities used to be gynecology surgery, cancer surgery, but it's now in IVF and reproductive medicine. So that was a short summary of my career.
That's amazing. You've covered so many different areas in your career. And I wanted to talk about that, about your passion for improving women's health outcomes. What do you think have been the main hurdles, and where do we still need to improve women's health?
I think women's health has to be improved all over, because first, I think, at least in Sweden and in many countries worldwide, it has been an emphasis on men's health. A lot of studies are done on men's, and it's a lot easier to get funding for diseases and so on, which are common among men. So concerning my first clinical interest, which was gyne-oncology, I know that at least we are now putting a lot more effort in to finding better cures for the common female cancer, but possibly is to detect some of the cancers earlier. So if we look at the female cancers, the most common is endometrial cancer or uterine cancer, which usually is detected early on because you get a symptom as a postpartum bleeding. But the big killer of gyne cancers among women is ovarian cancer, because that is growing inside your abdomen, and the woman will get the symptoms really late. Today we are doing a lot of research on finding biomarkers or screening programs to find the cancer earlier. So I think that is one big area. I also think another area is more personalized medicine, that is to see what in menopausal treatment with hormones, to see what is actually suiting each woman, possibly because you cannot treat every woman the same. And then, of course, the third issue is the fertility issue. We know that there is an increased rate of infertility among couples and among females. And the main reason is actually because the age of the woman to get the first baby is increasing. So I think that those are three main areas: cancer, menopausal, and not only to get treatment by hormones, but also in the menopause to protect the woman against diseases which can come when you get older. And then, of course, infertility.
So thank you for mentioning infertility. You've done a lot of work on this. So how do you feel the current situation around infertility and IVF, and where the future might lead us?
Yeah, so I think a lot has happened in infertility. We have to realize that the first IVF baby was born in 1978, and at that moment we didn't have a treatment for male infertility, but now we have the ICSI, which can combine with IVF. So a lot has happened, but I think it can be better. Concerning the standard IVF treatment, I think it's possible. The big steps forward will be possibly to know more about the endometrium, possibly to modify the endometrium so the implantation when the embryo is attaching to and growing in the uterus gets better and more. We know better when to put an embryo back, and we possibly can get also treatments to increase the implantation. I think that is one area. Concerning the embryo, which is the second part, which is important in IVF, I think the problem is aging oocytes giving rise to embryos, and poor quality of the embryos because of the aged oocytes. So there are certain ways of possibly rejuvenating oocytes or create oocytes from somatic cells, which has been done. Somatic cells, that is, for example, skin cells and so on, that has been done in animals. And I think when these technologies will come into the human use, the woman does not have to fight so much against her biological clock as they have to do today.
Yes, I think that the future of things like making eggs from stem cells will certainly be something that we'll head to. In the short term, before that happens, what do you think about egg freezing? So, when you and I started in this, we couldn't freeze eggs, and now we have the technology to successfully freeze the egg. And as you say, women are having children later. Do you think?
Do
you think it will become more normal, or younger girls will, soon after they've qualified with their degree, will head off and freeze their eggs? Where do you think that might take us?
I see that in the clinic. I was actually working in a private IVF clinic. We started with egg freezing, elective egg freezing, or social egg freezing, as we call it, in 2011. And at that time, the women who came in to do this, they were 38, 39, and 40 years of age, and that is actually too old to do this because the quality of the oocyte is not good enough. Today, there's been a lot written in the press in Sweden about that. There's been some celebrities doing egg freezing. And today we see that the age when the woman comes is about 33 to 36 years, and it's getting more and more popular. So I think this will actually increase. But of course, in Sweden and in many countries, this is not supported by the public health system. So the patient have to carry the cost themselves, not only for the IVF clinic cost, but also for the drugs. So it's a costly procedure, but I think it will. The use of this will increase. The more it's written about it, the more TV and so on shows about it. I think it's get more and more popular. And we also see that it's not only the patients come themselves; they sometimes they come with their parents because the parents think this is a good investment for them to be likely to have grandchildren and so on.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. And some of my friends who are gynecologists have taken their daughters themselves because they're thinking about their grandchildren. Yeah. I'd like to ask you now more about your pioneering work on womb transplant. So I've heard you talk about this several times, and I've been so fascinated by your presentations. So can you start by telling us about what led you to start working on this, and tell us a little bit about how that actually happens?
Yeah. So I think the start is actually interesting. It was by coincidence. As I said, I was working in Australia in 1998. I was then training in gynecology, which is cancer surgery. And after I had become independent surgeon, I was going to operate a young woman for cervical cancer. That is the gynecological cancer which also hits young women. She was 25 years of age. And I had to tell her, we have to remove the uterus, but you can keep your ovaries, but of course you can never carry a pregnancy. And she said, well, is that a problem? Can't you transplant a uterus? My mother could donate a uterus. And I was astonished. First, I'd never thought about the concept. I thought first I thought it was a little mad idea. I was also disappointed at myself because I thought I was an innovative person, that I had never thought about the concept. It had never been in my mind. But this was 1998, and this was the year they did the first hand transplant in France, that they did the first larynx transplant. So the concept of transplanting not only organs or tissues for life-saving purposes, but for quality of life enhancing purpose was out there. So I think that may possibly help the woman to give us the idea. What happened after some discussions with my colleagues is that I started to say, well, we should do a research project on this. You cannot jump from an idea to trials in the human. You have actually to test in animal models if this is working. So in 1999, I went home, and then we started in small rodents, in the mouse and the rat, to do this, and then we went up in bigger animals. And we were able to get the first pregnancy in mice in 2002, and this made the headlines in the world because this was the first time we could demonstrate that this was possible. And at that time, I would say, I thought, well, it would take a couple of more years, but it actually took us 13 years of research until we did the first trial in the human, which later was successful. And I think this the big achievement with my team's uterus transplantation project is not only the very difficult surgery or the research, is actually also to create a team, because for several years we were the same team that operated large animals that later operated the humans, so we had trained for many years.
Yeah, and how do you actually do it? What do you need to do this? Can you tell our listeners what it involves?
Yeah. So what you do is I mean, you have to have a recipient, and the recipients, the one who's going to get the womb, is usually women born without a uterus. It's called Rokitansky syndrome or MRKH syndrome. That is one in about 5,000 women born without this, or women that have lost the uterus at a young age, like cervical cancer. So the recipient will get the uterus, and if you use a live donor concept, that means like a kidney donor, there should be usually a close relative or a family friend donating the uterus. So we said, well, the mother, if she's not too old, would be a perfect donor. She would be motivated, and we know that the uterus would work because she had carried a pregnancy before. And then what you do is that you screen them psychologically with lab techniques and with imaging, and then you do the surgery on the donor, an hysterectomy, but it's a very complicated hysterectomy. An ordinary hysterectomy to take a uterus out for myoma takes 45 minutes, but this takes 10 hours, and that is because you have to have very long vascular pedicles of arteries and veins, and these vessels are very, very thin. So 10 hours of surgery to get the uterus out, and when you have the uterus out on the back table, you flush it and you cool it down, and then you start with the recipient surgery where you actually put the vessels on top of the vessels to the pelvis, and then you connect the vagina. And that is a 4 to 5 hour surgical procedure. So that is actually an easier procedure. You can also do this as a deceased donor procedure where you would get the uterus from a multi-organ donor. Then you would not have the long and risky surgery. And this multi-organ donor will also usually donate kidneys, liver, heart, and lungs.
So is this more complicated than doing something like a heart transplant?
Yeah, heart transplant is possibly one of the easiest transplants because you open the thorax and you have very good access, and it's very big vessels, you anastomose. You work down like in a narrow pelvis or a funnel, and the vessels are extremely small. So we work with transplant surgeons, and they say this is the most difficult live donor transplantation as can be done. And then you can compare with the liver, renal, or lung transplants, which can be done with a live donor also.
So you must be working through the night then if you've got 10 hours to...
Yeah, usually we start like 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and we end at midnight. But the thing is that we do this with an extremely motivated team, and it's very challenging and exciting surgery. So we don't get tired. We just go on, and we love to do this. And what we do now is we don't only work in Sweden, we also help other centers around the world to start programs, and then we come to teach them the procedure. So we just came back from Australia where we did a couple of transplants in early 2023.
How many have you done in total now?
Our team has done 32, and in the total in the world, I think it's more than 90 procedures done.
And so the women are doing this because they obviously want to have a baby. How many babies have been born?
In Sweden, we have 12 babies born. We have 5 ongoing pregnancies, and I think worldwide there are more than 50 babies born. So it has proven in many centers to be a very effective treatment. So possibly 85% of those with a good graft will get a baby. So it's very effective, but of course it's a very large and complex infertility procedure.
And tell us about the delivery. I've heard you talk about this. So when it comes to delivery, obviously you have to be a lot more careful here than with someone who's got pregnant in their own womb.
Yeah, with the delivery, we do that by cesarean section because we have done a lot of anastomosis of the uterus, and it will possibly not be good to go through labor. And otherwise, the C-section would be similar as an ordinary C-section. If they only want one baby, we will take the uterus away at the time of C-section or shortly after. If they want to go for a second baby, which they can do, then we let the uterus stay in place. concerning the pregnancy, the patient will feel less of contractions and less of pain if they go into pre-labor, and that is because the uterus doesn't have the nerve connections.
And have you had any women that have had a second pregnancy?
Yeah, we have had 3 women in Sweden having 2 babies, and we have 2 ongoing pregnancies for a second baby. And in Sweden, we say maximum 2 babies because you should not keep the graft for more than 5 or 6 years, because the drugs you have to take to prevent even rejection can have potential toxic effect on the kidneys if you could have them for a long time.
It is. I just think it's amazing. It always. I find it so interesting hearing you talk about that, because it's, something that we've been waiting for years, and your team have done so much work on leading this globally. I really commend you. And I know there's some criticism, and people say, lots of things about it. What are the main criticisms that you've had?
I mean, the main questions is we have surrogacy. Do we need uterus transplantation? And my answer to this is that surrogacy is not allowed in most parts of the world, would never been accepted in some big religions like the Islamic religion. It's not allowed in Sweden. And we know from, because surrogacy is practiced by Swedish women, so we have done surveys in Sweden, and that has also been done in Japan and other studies. If a woman without a uterus, if she could choose between uterus transplantation and surrogacy, what would she choose? And most would prefer uterus transplantation. Even if it's a risky procedure, I think they also want to experience the pregnancy and the bonding between the mother and the fetus and the mother during pregnancy.
Yeah, no,
But I think it's not going to be either surrogacy or uterus transplantation. I think they will complement each other. Some people will be suitable for surrogacy, some will be suitable for uterus transplantation.
So talking about surrogacy, we see a growing number of celebrities in the media who are having surrogacy, and it's obviously their story, and it's up to them if they tell us their whole reproductive journey. But some of them have admitted that they don't need a surrogate, that they're doing it because they don't want to carry a baby for various reasons. So, and you're treating women who are going at great lengths to carry their own baby. How do you feel about this growing use of surrogacy for maybe non-medical reasons?
No, of course I don't like it, because I think it's exploiting women, because the poor women would in most cases do it not altruistically but for money. And but I think the worst thing is with this that people see these celebrities getting kids when they're old, and they don't know that there's oocyte donation or there's surrogacy behind, and then they would think that it would be possible for them also, and easy to get a baby when they're 40 plus or 45 plus. And they don't really actually realize what is behind these celebrities' childbirth, and of course they don't realize how costly it is. But I don't approve of that, and I think we need more information in the society about when is the peak of the reproductive age of the women and when is it declining, and when should you start a family if you should get your 1 or 2 or 3 children. And of course, if you by natural way will get 5, if you want 3 children, there have been research on that, you possibly should start at least when you're 29, 30 to have a good chance of that. And I don't think people realize that, and I think part of they not realizing that is that they see these celebrities getting children at old age.
Yeah, I totally agree. My main research now is all about reproductive health education, and I think the problem with the celebrities is that it is really misleading people to believe that they can easily have children in their 50s, and it's really, really, as you say, it's hugely expensive, and we've got other things going on such as egg donation. So staying on the wombs, so another technology that people like to talk about is artificial wombs, and will we have the possibility that women don't need to carry a child at all, that we'll enter Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, which the book he wrote almost 100 years ago, where nobody had a baby the way we're doing it now. No one would need a womb transplant. We would just all do this in the lab. The embryologist will choose which embryo becomes which sort of person, and there's no family anymore. There's no pregnancy, and everything happens in a much more clinical way. Where do you think we might be in maybe 50 years? I don't think you and I will be here to view it, but what do you think it will be like to have a family in the future?
Yeah, concerning this artificial wombs, it's called ectogenesis. There are researchers doing that, but and what has happened is, of course, we have actually decreased the span of when an embryo or a fetus has to be in the natural womb, because now we can put them inside the womb after 7 days as a blastocyst, and you can possibly deliver at week 22 and so on. And there are ongoing research in animals to possibly decrease that. You could have an artificial womb, not for the first part of pregnancy, but actually to shorten this time. So in a human case, possibly that you could deliver into an artificial womb at week 20, and the pregnancy is 40 weeks, and then the fetus can actually grow inside this artificial milieu for some time. I think what going to be problematic is the first 10 weeks of pregnancy, because there's so many genetic things happening in the fetus, and the organs are forming during this time. And I think it will be very difficult to mimic the physiological situation as we have in the womb. But you should never say no, but I think it will take a long time, and we have to, of course, do a lot of research to know what is exactly happening in early pregnancy in the human during this early, very important first 10 weeks when all the organs are formed and so on. So I think what will happen during the next 20 or 30 years is that we will, in animal models, be able to decrease that time which is necessary to be in the womb, and possibly we could actually adapt some of that to the human. But there may be other ways. Perhaps you can transplant a gene-modified human uterus into an animal, and that animal can keep the human uterus and have the part of the pregnancy in that. That would be possible. There's also other possibilities.
Yeah, wow, that's a really interesting concept, and I totally agree with you. I think we never say never. There's some things that you and I are involved with now that when we were much younger was science fiction, and here we are doing these things now. So I think it's going to be interesting to see where this research goes, for sure. So I ask all my guests, have you heard people say, why didn't anyone tell me this? Especially around women's health. So if you have heard that, what sort of things did they ask?
I haven't thought about that question. Take the question once again.
Have you heard people say, why didn't anyone tell me this?
I think in this I think I can relate to mostly my own project with the uterus transplantation, and I would say, why didn't anyone presented this concept to me before. I heard this from the patient and so on. And of course, many people would say it would be impossible, but then I say, well, if people thinks it's impossible, I think you have to test with research if it's possible or not. I think that is what I can relate to mostly. But I mean, I think this what we discussed before about creating germ cells, sperms, and oocytes from somatic cells and so on. And when I first heard about that happening in the mice, I was also surprised that I never thought about that concept before. So I think what we have to be is that we should not be surprised about new ideas coming up, which we never heard about or which we never thought about. But we have to, as researchers in the field, we have to make sure that they are tested in appropriate models before we introduce these ideas into the human, because we have actually to see that they are safe.
Thank you. I find I'm spending a lot of my time, which I get a bit frustrated, on debunking myths. So I think with social media, this has become much more of a problem, that we get myths that are generated. So in your career in women's health, are there myths that you have come across that you feel we need to make clear that they are myths and not true?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most common is that if you are a long time on the oral contraceptive pill, that it may be more difficult to get pregnant. That's a myth that I hear from many patients. I also would relate to a lot of the ads on people. People think that will be beneficial when they do IVF. There could be nutritional things, could be vitamins and so on, and that a lot. And they have read about this in social media and in the papers. They've heard, they have friends that have tested this and they have got pregnant and so on. So I always, when they ask about these things, I always say, well, you have to look at the science. What are the facts? What do we know? And sometimes I tell the patients if they want to take a nutritional agent and so on, well, you can take it. Possibly it has no harm, but it will cost you a lot of money, and we have no proof that it will be beneficial.
I think you're totally right. I think the money.
And of course, I can also relate to myths when I was a cancer surgeon, because when people get cancer, they often look for explanations in their lives that they have done something wrong which has caused the cancer. And of course, everybody relates to smoking, and smoking is not good. But for instance, smoking is a protecting factor against ovarian cancer and so on. So it's not only always that the bad guys are bad for that particular cancer.
I agree about the monetization of women's health. There's every week I see another product that will help women in being healthy, because it's just become a huge market now. And these lotions and potions and menopause things and fertility helps and aids, it's a growing list of money making campaigns to I think mislead women in many aspects. So the last few questions.
And I can also say that I mean, what I see with the modern women who seek infertility treatment, so many people have these monitoring apps of the menstruation and so on, and of course that is very good for the doctor to know exactly when they had menstruation and when they will have menstruations and so on. But I think sometimes the couple can be too locked in by these monitoring apps instead of, and that may be stressful, and that may harm them, may cause them harm in their infertility situation. So I think the modern woman tends to rely too much on the apps. I would say they're very. I think that's very common that they actually design their life and their sex life and so on all by the apps and the periods when they can get pregnant and so on. But sometimes it may be better just to relax and don't think about that and live natural.
And there's more apps coming. I can tell you, there's going to be apps for everything. So you've had an amazing career where you've helped so many people. So what motivates you?
I think I mean it motivates me. Of course, I'm a doctor and I like to help my patients. But of course, what actually gives you the I think the feedback you get from the patients, and that can be the same in cancer treatment as in infertility treatment, and the happiness you see, that gives me the motivation. And also, of course, I'm a father of 5 children. I know sometimes it's a lot of problems to have children also, but I also see the enjoyment it has given me. So I think that is why I'm very motivated to help women and also men in relationships to get their child, because I know that actually means so much to their quality of life. But the big day-to-day motivation and so on are the good or the feedback from the patients. And of course, in this uterus transplantation situation, I get messages or greetings on emails, and especially when it's Christmas, and when I see that I've actually created a little family with this child in between the mother and the father, that really makes me happy. That is the biggest reward I can get.
That's really beautiful. Last couple of questions. What makes you happy and where is your happy place? I'm doing a lot of work about happiness. I'm hopefully writing a book about being happy when you're older. So I'm asking everybody, what makes them happy and where's the happy place?
I mean, my happiness is either on the sailing boat or in this or cross country skiing when I feel close to nature and when you get away a little from the ordinary setting. But of course, I can also be happy with just having a cup of coffee and doing the cross work. What is it called? Crosswork? No?
Yep, crossword. Yep.
When you do the crossword, and so on. So the small things, but also it's always like seeing the kids being happy and doing well. That's happiness. I have 5 kids, but not yet any grandchildren. So I think when I will get grandchildren, that will actually be a happiness to me also.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that almost all my guests have said something to do with water and lots to do with nature. Yeah, I think that really does. And the very final question. So we're of a certain age and we've got hopefully some wisdom. So if you could turn back time, what advice would you give your younger self? Or maybe what would be the main advice you'd give your children about life?
Yeah, no, I talk to my children a lot, and I said, I mean, when you decide what job you're going to go into or what kind of career, if you're going to study this or having practical work, don't go on tactics and so go on your feelings, because I think if you're passionate about your work, you will get a more happy person. And then in at least if you do a research career or a doctor's career, and that is that you should be open to suggestions. If people thinks that this or suggest this and this, you should treat it with an open mind and possibly evaluate yourself if this would be possible and so on to help a person. So I also tell my kids, be open and take the opportunities when they're given to you, And there will never be the right moment, the perfect moment for an opportunity, but it may be okay for this opportunity. Take it and explore it.
That's really wonderful advice to everybody, to all of our listeners. So, Mats, I wanted to hugely thank you. We've covered lots of different topics, and I'm sure the listeners are going to be really fascinated by all of the work you've done. So thank you very much for coming on my podcast.
Thank you, Joyce.